Welcome to the stream. Earlier in the week, I made a survey. This actually has nothing to do with my channel per se, but I just kind of got curious on some things, and I decided to make a survey all about maps because I kind of thought like every time I get like an atlas or a history book with maps in it, they always have like different ways of formatting their maps, and some I've noticed that some companies will prefer their own style over another. And so I thought, I wonder what everyone else thinks. So I just made a survey, so I'm going to read that off. And then after that, I'm going to do some super chat Q&As for a little bit, and that'll pretty much be the video for this week. I wanted to have the video over. Wow, I actually forgot his name. The one that you voted on, where the Russian general wanted to be Khan of Mongolia, but this week I've been kind of busy, so I haven't had time. So that'll probably come next week, and so this will kind of be the video for this week, if you will. So thank you all to the almost. See, it says 2,100, but yeah, I guess it's around like 2,100, 2,200 people that have participated in the survey. So we're gonna go ahead and read that off, and feel free to submit your super chats. While I'm doing that, I'll be able to see them all when it's all done. So yeah, I'll go ahead and get started. So question one, what is your favorite kind of map? So then you have political maps, which is the winner, and that's like, the map that you think of when you see a map of just like the countries on it. Physical map, which shows like the mountains, the desert, something that you probably see in like a science classroom. That only had 2%. Topographic map is in last place, and that's not surprising. If you've never seen a topographic map, so like a topographic map is kind of like these, where like you have some of the physical features, but it mainly focuses on elevation, and so you've got lines that represent like 10 feet or 5 feet, or in some cases a mile. It depends on like what the map is of. Um, yeah, like you'll see those in like some science classrooms, but they're technically their own thing. So, not surprising though that that was last place. Satellite photo map, so like Google Earth, and then mix of political and physical had 36%, and statistical map had 4%. And only 6 people picked other. I'm not even sure what the other would be, but it's something. All right, so favorite map projection. The problem is, I would have to like pay money to like include photos in this survey, so I wasn't really able to like add the photos of each of the projections. So I tried to describe it best I could, and of course anyone could have just looked it up, but I could probably do that here. So favorite map projection, and I'm actually kind of surprised that Mercator, even if it's only 30%, is in first place. And Mercator, you all should know what it would look like. So like that would be a Mercator. The thing where everyone's upset that Greenland is the size of Africa, and that's because Mercator was invented in a time for sailors, and so even though the shapes are accurate, the size is not accurate. But for a sailor, they could at least go, hey, if I sail west from here, I'll end up here, or from there I'll end up there if I go the same direction. And so it was at least practical for a while. Now that we have like satellite maps and much more advanced ships, it's less needed. But it's definitely a classic map projection. Certainly not my favorite, but apparently it won the poll. The Gale Peters, which is my least favorite of the map projections, and you'll see why. Sees this it. Yeah, this is actually the Gales Peter map, to where the size is correct, like the size proportion. So Greenland is the same size and proportion to Africa, but the shapes are very distorted around the top and bottom, and I just don't like how it looks at all, and so I am not a fan of this map projection. Um, I mean, it certainly has its place in certain areas, but it's just not my map projection. And that one only got 7%. The good Homolazine, that's the one where, like, I'm sure your science teacher has told you that, like, oh, you can't flatten the earth because if you flatten a sphere, it's kind of like, flattening an orange peel. And then, like, they'll show you and it kind of makes a shape like that. That's pretty much exactly what the people thought of when they decided to make this map projection. And so they'd act like, okay, we'll act like we're flattening an orange peel slice. And so this is kind of like, a way to like, well, it cuts through the oceans and poor Greenland. It cuts through Greenland, but that doesn't matter. So, this is relatively accurate in size and shape. Um, so, that it's a thing. I've seen it in a few science textbooks too. That one only got 2%. The Winkle Triple, and that is the one that National Geographic. Oh, how to do that? But that's the one that National Geographic uses. So that's the Winkle Triple. Um, it's kind of like an oval, but it's still flattened at the top and bottom. This is the official projection that National Geographic maps have been using since like the 90s or so. Um, and here's the thing, if you guys are like good at math, this is actually the most mathematically compromising globe. So if you like want something that has the least amount of distortion in shapes and the least amount of distortion in size, this is like mathematically proven to be the perfect middle, which is why National Geographic uses it. So especially if you want something that's like the perfect middle compromise between something like the Gall-Peters and the Mercator, this is the map that you would want to use. Um, this one's actually not my favorite, but I do like this projection. So there's that one. Then the Vandergritten, which it's not really that special. I'll pull it up. The Vandergritten is almost like kind of like a Mercator, but it curves around the edges and it's on a circle. And like this projection was like really popular in like the 20s, 30s, and 40s. I mean, it's certainly like a nice classic looking map style, but you know, it's not that special in my opinion. That only got 2%. Azimuthal, and I wrote think of the UN flag, and that's because it's the same projection that's on the UN flag. It's that one. It's kind of the one that the idiotic flat mappers will try to claim is what the Earth really looks like. Well, it's just a projection. But this projection is used for some maps that kind of want to show like something like a map of global trade, for example, but something that wouldn't like cut any country off. So this, it's like, oh, this shipped from here all the way to there, or there to there, and like it wouldn't have to like cut across the map like in the Pacific Ocean like most maps do. And it's all, like I said, it's also the one that they use on the UN flag. So there's that one, and that one only got 2%, just barely more than the good Homolazine one. And then my favorite one, the Robinson projection. This one you're probably relatively familiar with because it's very common. This is what National Geographic used before they switched over to the Winkle Triple. And while it's not mathematically perfect, I mean, it looks good. I just kind of like how it looks and how the tops and bottoms are like completely squished towards the middle, like the Winkle Triple, and how this is just kind of a nice ovaloid type thing. And I don't know, that one's my favorite. And that one had 8%, which is above almost all of the others. But yeah. And then the last one that I included is kind of more of an obscure one, but if you're a map nerd, it's pretty great. The Waterman Butterfly. So, kind of like the orange slice thing, they thought, well, you can't perfectly flatten it, so we'll just make a super weird shape. And so they made the butterfly projection where they opened it up like it was like a origami piece or something like that, and then just made the map look like that, and then they had like a separate one for Antarctica. This almost looks like one of those things that like you could fold up like an origami thing, and then like those like little slits in the side you'd like slide into place with like some pins or something, and that would hold the map together. But it's certainly its own projection. So and that one only got 21 people because not very many people know about it. And then of course Globe. It was like 6 votes away from being first place, but a globe because that's a projection. It technically counts, and so that one was really popular too. And then 3% said other. So this is definitely interesting results. I'm not surprised that Globe is that high because I think that not only well it's a valid choice, globes look cool and nice, but also I think it's kind of like a cynical answer too. Just like a globe, duh, and like that's not what I meant. I wanted you to pick like a flat one, but I am kind of surprised that Mercator got that much. So we'll continue. All right, so map projections aside, let's get a little bit more generalized. What kind of projection style is better? So this kind of goes back to what I talked about earlier, where you had some maps where like the shapes are more accurate, but the size is not, like the Mercator. And interestingly, that actually had less choices than the Mercator. So I don't know if it's because people aren't as knowledgeable in this area or not, but interesting result. Equal area where the size is accurate but the shapes are not, at only 7%, which yeah, that actually matches Gail Peters a lot better. So yeah, that one's makes sense. Equidistant, and that's where distances from the center are the same, and that is pretty much the same as like the azimuthal one, which actually that had roughly the same number of people, so that's pretty good. And then compromise is a middle between shape and size, so that could have been the Robinson, the Winklevan triple, and all that stuff, and that had 32%. And of course, 35% said a globe, which is more than this one, uh, than that one. So yeah, not surprised there, but also interesting. All right, then if there's a standard political map of the world, what features do you want to see on that map? Check all that apply. Assume you can't zoom in so there's limited space. So like I'm talking about like a map that you are holding in your hands, whether it's in a book or it's like a travel map. Whenever it shows a political map, they'll try to show features besides just, the countries and stuff. And some are way more detailed than others. And like sometimes if it's like a map of like a province or something like that, they can show more detail because it's quote more zoomed in. But this is like a map of the world, so obviously the more things you'd add, the more crowded it would get. Which is why some people have preferences on what they would want to see on a map and what they wouldn't want to see. So obviously, country borders on a political map. I'm surprised it's not at 100%, but it is, or it's at 97%, so that's close enough. That's obviously the top one. Then 83% country names, which I find interesting that there'd be people fine with just the borders and no names on it. Capital cities at 80%. Then it actually has rivers at 70%. Um, then let's see if there's, I guess, other notable cities besides the capital, 56%, which I actually thought would be a little bit higher. Because if you like ever pull out like a National Geographic map of the world, or any map really, they show a lot more cities than you think. Um, So it's kind of interesting how it's only 56%. Then 50% said labels for bodies of water. Oh, and then 54% said unrecognized countries. So that would be something like Kosovo, Northern Cyprus, the Ukrainian separatists, and things like that. Um, and usually those are indicated differently from normal countries, but sometimes they'll still show it. Um, Province or state borders for the bigger countries, or if it can fit. So 47%. Um, so like realistically for like a world map, like you'd be able to show the provinces for like the United States, Canada, Brazil, Russia, China, but then like the smaller countries you probably wouldn't have enough room. But there are several maps where it will show the provinces of only like 5 or 6 countries just because it has the room. So then let's see. Mountain textures at 40%. So like they'll show like it doesn't actually like show the mountains on there. Like here, I'll show you what I mean. So like even from here, without zooming in, you can tell how there's like tiny little ridges in here. They're usually very faded, but or like granted this is a physical map, but they'll show like ridges like where the mountains are, and like even in political maps, they'll still kind of show that faded in certain areas. And so if you look close enough, you could see it. So that way oh, okay, that city's in the mountains or whatever. So 40%. Then labels for notable mountains. So that would be like when like you'd label Mount Everest and whatever large mountains you'd prefer to label. 27%. Highway routes or routes and then roads, things like that. 20%, because some maps do that. Um, 16% said they would show railroad tracks, and 11% or 15% would show historical ruins, and 11% would show national parks. Historical ruins, that they would usually do the thing where they have like the 3 triangle dot things, and that would be something like, oh, this is where Babylon is at, because like some maps will do that. And then national parks, usually what they'll do, you'll probably notice it in like Google Maps, but they'll have the national parks in like a green color and just color the area where the national parks are at, just so you know. Um, yeah, so this kind of went as I expected it. I do find it interesting how unrecognized countries and rivers are so high, but they're not exactly uncommon on maps, so otherwise it was pretty linear, not linear, roughly the same descending order that I expected it would be. If the map includes cities, how do you want them to be labeled? So obviously the most common answer is a circle dot, but in here I kind of split the answer up to where uh, 20% said just circle dots all around, 7% said square dots because some map makers will do that. And then big cities with a bigger circle and smaller cities with a smaller circle. So like New York City would have a bigger round dot than uh, St. Louis or something like that. And some apps will do that to show extra detail. That actually had the most answers at 56%. Then big cities with a bigger square, smaller cities with a smaller square, so the same thing as that, but with squares, that had 14%. So I find it interesting that both squares and circles preferred showing the size difference. And then 4% said other. Not sure what that would be, but other. How should capitals be labeled? Because capitals are always shown differently than the normal cities, which is why I didn't include the normal circle dot, just because they almost never, ever, ever do that. Um, Obviously, the most popular answer is just, a 5 point star, because that's what most maps will do. And so that understandably got 58%. 11% said a circle dot with another circle around it, like I showed right there. I've seen that in a few older maps. a square dot. So maybe you use circles for the normal cities, but you want to use squares for the capitals. I've seen some do that. And some will decide to put a star with a circle around it, which that got 21%, so that was the second most popular choice. And then a diamond, just because I was trying to think of another shape that I've seen before, which I've only seen once, but they've done it. 1%. And then square dot with another square around it at 5%, and other at 1%. Again, not sure what that would be, but some person had an idea. How should mountains be labeled? Um, so some places will have just a triangle for any labeled mountains that they choose, and then some will do the same, but if it's a volcano, they'll make it red. And that had 69% versus 26%, and then 5% said other. So that's a more simple question, but interesting result. How should borders be depicted? 91% said a solid line, which I think is the most obvious answer, and I'm not surprised that this is there at all. But some maps will prefer a dotted line, and some maps will prefer like a line dot line type border, which it's kind of hard to explain just because in like typing it out it doesn't quite work. But so like imagine that, but like those are longer lines, and the dot is like the same alignment as those lines. But that's pretty much what that is. Or a dashed line, which had 2%, and other at 1%. But not surprised by this majority at any by any means. Should provincial borders be different from national borders on the map? So if the national borders are like a solid line or dash line or dotted line, should the borders of states and provinces look different? 20% said yes, but with a lighter color. So like maybe the national borders are black solid line, and then the provincial borders would be gray or something like that. Yes, same as national borders, but with a thinner width. So the borders of countries would be thicker, and then states would be thinner. Yes, but with a dashed or dotted line instead of a solid line, and that had 56%, and that was the highest answer. 3% said, nah, just leave them the same. People will just know. Should unrecognized countries be shown with different borders? Yes, make their borders a different pattern of line, 59%. So that's actually kind of what some will do. So, like Northern Cyprus, they'll use the dotted or dashed lines for that, since it's an unrecognized country. That had 59%. Yes, make their borders a different color, and that had 28%. Don't even show them at all, had 13%. Nope. All right, if a border goes along a river, show the border over the river, covering it up, 37%. Weirdly, this one's actually kind of like the weirdest question on here, and it's one of those things that once you start noticing, you will never stop unnoticing. Each mapmaker will have its own idea on how it wants to do borders along a river. Because like many countries will just divide their borders down the middle of a river, and so if they show a river, um, some will just cover the river, but then some map makers really want you to know that it's a river border, and so sometimes when it covers the river, they'll actually make the border like a purple type color, to almost like they're mixing blue with whatever color they made the line, and sometimes they'll do that. It's weird. So 37% said they would just cover it up. Uh, so 60% said show the river but no border. So that would be like you just wouldn't even draw the border if it's on a river. The river would be the border, and whatever like the color of the countries are would be good enough to show you that it's a border. Make it go along the river right next to it but not covering it. So some map makers will do that where they'll just show the lines like parallel to each other and touching each other, so that way you know that both are there. And then 10% said just don't even show border rivers on border maps in the first place, which, fair enough. So yeah. How should countries be labeled? And I gave an example to where like it's in all caps, or you spell it the normal way with like the capital first letter and da 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 da, or underline the name because some will do that. That only had 6%. All caps had 34%, and then just the normal way had 61%. Interesting. I probably would have picked that too because I don't usually like it when it's in all caps. Well, I don't know. I think it actually depends on the font, strangely enough. Um, Maybe I don't mind all caps. I don't know. I guess it would just depend on how it looks. Because each map company has its own font too. But I do not like the underline name thing, so I'm kind of glad that that one only had 6%. How should a political map be colored in? Solid colors per country, making sure they never match the bordering country. By far the most popular answer at 70%. 16% said color outlines around the edge of the country with no color towards the middle, which is what National Geographic does, which I'll go ahead and pull up an example of. So as you can see, like National Geographic will kind of do this thing where they'll have colored bands like going around the edges of the country. Kind of like you can see right there, Ukraine is brown, Belarus is yellow, and Poland is purple, and things like that. But the actual middles of the country will be white, and that's just kind of their style. It's been their style for a while, for at least for political map. So, oh, there you can kind of see it better. But that's just what they do. And I think it's so like things like mountain textures and rivers would show up easier. But it's a valid choice. And then I prefer as little color as possible. Think Google Maps, 13%. All right, ignoring the country's culture, history, or anything else, which continent has the best shape? So try to put everything else aside. Like, what continent shape do you just think looks the coolest? And unsurprisingly, Europe won with 30%. Um, let's see. I guess Africa was second place with 18%. North America, or sorry, Eurasia, just combining Europe and, pardon me, combining Europe and Asia at 15%. Then North America at 10%. 10%. Then South America and Antarctica at 6%. Oh, 7% was like both North and South America put together because some people would just consider it a single continent. Then Asia only at 71 with 4%. And yeah, I kind of agree because like Asia, just the European border just makes it look awkward, and it's just so big, it just kind of looks weird. But Eurasia looks pretty cool. Um, so not that surprised by these results. And then finally, which map company do you prefer? 49% just said, I just use Google Maps, which, fair enough. 29% said National Geographic, 4% said Rand McNally, and then 1% each for the others. These, I can't remember if A to Z map is Australian or British. It's one of the two. Collins Bartholomew is definitely British, and then C.S. Hammond is American, but it's kind of more old fashioned. So, that one's relatively popular. I mean, between these three. Um, and then 50% said other, which, there's so many map companies, who knows? But,